In the 5th century, the Roman Empire faced an enemy unlike any it had known before. He did not need to capture Rome to terrify its rulers. He could appear on the horizon with thousands of mounted warriors, strike deep into Roman territory, demand gold from emperors, and disappear before a conventional army could bring him to battle. His name was Attila, and within a few years, his reputation had become so terrifying that Roman diplomacy itself began to revolve around the question of what he might do next. Yet Attila's greatest weapon was not simply the bow, the horse, or even the army that followed him. It was the fear he created inside the Roman political system. He understood that a threatened emperor could be more useful than a defeated army. He knew when to negotiate, when to invade, and when to make an impossible demand. But how did a ruler from the Eurasian steppe become one of the most feared figures in the final century of the Western Roman Empire? Long before Attila marched into Gaul or Italy, Rome was already changing. The empire of late antiquity was enormous, wealthy, and militarily sophisticated, but it was also under growing pressure. Civil wars, political rivalries, economic strain, and repeated invasions had weakened the stability that earlier emperors had taken for granted. In the West, Roman armies increasingly depended on federate forces and commanders from outside the traditional Roman establishment. Far to the north and east of the Roman frontier, another world was taking shape. The Huns had emerged from the Eurasian steppe and had moved into regions north of the Black Sea during the 4th and 5th centuries. They were not a single nation in the modern sense. Their power rested on a changing confederation of groups held together by military success, personal loyalty, wealth, and the authority of their rulers. The Huns possessed a style of warfare that was extremely difficult for settled armies to counter. Their mounted warriors could travel rapidly across enormous distances, attack with powerful composite bows, and use mobility to choose when and where to fight. A Roman infantry formation might be heavily armed and disciplined, but none of that mattered if the enemy refused to stand still long enough to be destroyed. And Rome had another problem. The Huns were not simply raiders living beyond the frontier. They had learned that the Roman Empire was rich, politically divided, and willing to pay enormous sums to avoid war. That realization would eventually produce one of the most dangerous bargains in Roman history. Attila was born sometime around the beginning of the 5th century, probably around 406, although the exact year is uncertain. His father, Munzuk, belonged to the ruling family of the Huns. Attila grew up in a political world where military power and diplomacy were inseparable. As a young man, he was exposed to the Roman frontier and to the complicated negotiations between Hunnic leaders and Roman officials. When Attila and his brother Bleda inherited power in the 430s, they did not immediately destroy the Roman frontier. Instead, they exploited it. Treaties could bring gold, threats could bring more gold, and raids could demonstrate exactly what would happen when Rome refused. In 434, the brothers negotiated with the Eastern Roman government at Margus near the Danube. The resulting agreement increased payments to the Huns and gave them other advantages. Rome had not been conquered, but the Huns had discovered something extremely valuable. The empire could be pressured into paying for peace. Then Attila began eliminating the competition. Bleda and Attila ruled together for roughly a decade, but by the middle of the 440s, Bleda was dead. Ancient sources generally associate his death with Attila, although the exact circumstances remain uncertain. Whatever happened, Attila emerged as the sole ruler of the Hunnic power structure, and this changed the scale of the threat facing Rome. He was no longer sharing authority with another king. Now every major decision led back to one man. Attila turned his attention toward the Eastern Roman Empire. In the 440s, Hunnic forces crossed the Danube and devastated Roman territory in the Balkans. Cities were captured, populations were displaced, and Roman armies struggled to respond effectively. The Huns did not need to occupy every province permanently. Their campaigns were designed to make resistance unbearably expensive. The Roman government eventually agreed to much heavier payments. This was the paradox at the heart of Attila's power. Rome was still rich enough to pay him, but every payment made the Huns stronger. Gold could be transformed into horses, weapons, supplies, political loyalty, and more soldiers. The empire was effectively financing the enemy it feared, but the Eastern Roman Empire was not Attila's only target. The Western Roman Empire had its own political fractures, and Attila soon found an opportunity there. The key figure was Honoria, the sister of the Western Emperor Valentinian Roman III. According to ancient accounts, Honoria became involved in a scandal at court and sent Attila a ring, which he interpreted as a proposal of marriage. Attila then demanded Honoria's marriage and claimed a share of the Western imperial inheritance. Whether Attila genuinely believed he had a legal claim or simply used the incident as a pretext for war is impossible to establish with certainty. But the result was clear. In 451, Attila moved west with a massive coalition of warriors and entered Gaul. The invasion created panic across Roman territory. Cities prepared for attack, populations fled, and the Western Roman commander Flavius Aetius began assembling a coalition of his own. This was extraordinary because Aetius had spent years dealing with the Huns and other barbarian powers. Now the man who had once relied on Hunnic support was preparing to fight them. Aetius understood something crucial. Rome alone might not be able to stop Attila. So he turned to the Visigoths, led by King Theodoric I, along with other allied forces. Attila's army advanced toward the heart of Gaul, but instead of immediately destroying the Roman coalition, he moved toward the city of Aurelianum, modern Orleans. The city resisted. Then Aetius and his allies arrived. Attila withdrew and the two armies finally met somewhere in northeastern Gaul at a battlefield traditionally known as the Catalaunian Plains. The exact location remains debated, but the confrontation became one of the defining battles of the 5th century. The battle was brutal and confused. Ancient sources describe enormous forces, though their numbers are almost certainly exaggerated. What mattered was the strategic balance. Attila had the mobility and experience of the steppe armies, while Aetius had created a coalition that combined Roman military organization with powerful Gothic warriors. Theodoric I was killed during the fighting, but the coalition held. Attila's army was prevented from achieving the decisive victory it needed. And yet this was not a simple Roman triumph. Aetius did not destroy Attila's army. The Hunnic forces remained intact enough to withdraw, and Attila remained powerful. The battle had stopped his advance, but it had not ended the Hunnic threat. That distinction would become important very quickly. The following year, Attila invaded Italy. This time, his target was the heartland of the Western Roman Empire. Hunnic forces entered northern Italy and captured several cities, including the strategically important city of Aquileia after a prolonged siege. The invasion caused widespread devastation and forced Roman authorities into another desperate search for a solution. Yet something unexpected happened. Attila did not continue directly toward Rome. His army was operating in a region already suffering from war and disease, and supplying a large force in Italy was difficult. The Huns had also encountered resistance from fortified cities. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire was able to threaten Attila's territories in the Balkans, creating another strategic problem behind him. Then came one of the most famous meetings in ancient history, near the Mincio River. Attila encountered a Roman embassy that included Pope Leo I. Later tradition transformed the meeting into a dramatic moment in which Leo personally persuaded Attila to spare Rome. The reality was probably more complicated. Negotiations, military considerations, supply problems, and pressure from the Eastern Empire may all have influenced Attila's decision. Whatever happened, Attila withdrew from Italy. Rome had survived, but not because it had defeated him in battle. Once again, diplomacy and circumstances had accomplished what armies alone could not. For centuries afterward, this retreat helped create the legend of Attila as a conqueror who had nearly brought the Roman world to its knees. But the truth is more interesting than the legend. Attila was not an unstoppable military machine. He lost the strategic initiative in Gaul, failed to destroy Aetius's coalition, withdrew from Italy, and depended heavily on a political system built around personal authority and wealth. His power was enormous, but it was also fragile. The Huns themselves left surprisingly few written records. Much of what we know about Attila comes from his enemies, especially Roman and later Byzantine writers. That means the famous image of Attila has always been partly shaped by those who feared him. Even his physical appearance has been filtered through hostile descriptions. The Roman historian Priscus actually met Attila and described a ruler whose personal behavior could be restrained and deliberate. Attila was capable of spectacular violence, but he was also a calculating diplomat who understood ceremony, status, and political theater. One of the greatest misconceptions is that Attila personally destroyed the Western Roman Empire. He did not. The Western Empire survived his death by several decades. Its collapse resulted from a much broader combination of political instability, civil wars, economic problems, military fragmentation, and the loss of effective imperial control over important territories. Another misconception is that the Huns were simply primitive barbarians overwhelming civilized Rome. The reality was more complicated. The Huns interacted constantly with Roman society. They traded with Romans, negotiated with Roman officials, employed people from different cultures, and incorporated various peoples into their military confederation. Their greatest advantage was not that they possessed some magical weapon unknown to Rome. It was their ability to combine mobility, mounted archery, intimidation, diplomacy, and rapid concentration of force. They could force an opponent to respond to them on terms that were often unfavorable. Archaeology also reminds us that the Hunnic world was culturally diverse. Objects associated with Hunnic era burials reveal connections across an enormous region, including weaponry, horse equipment, jewelry, and elite goods. The evidence suggests a world of movement and cultural exchange rather than a simple civilization versus barbarism story. And then, almost as suddenly as Attila had risen, his story ended. In 453. After returning to the center of his power, Attila died during the night following a wedding feast. The 6th century historian Jordanes reported that he suffered a severe nosebleed and suffocated while lying on his back, although modern historians cannot verify the exact cause. He was buried secretly according to the account, and the people involved in the burial were reportedly killed so that his resting place would remain unknown. With Attila gone, the political structure holding the Hunnic Confederation together began to fracture. His sons competed for authority, subject peoples rebelled, and the military coalition that had made Attila so powerful rapidly lost its cohesion. Within a generation, the Hunnic power that had terrified the Roman world was largely gone. That may be the most revealing fact of all. Attila's empire did not survive him because it depended heavily on one ruler's ability to command loyalty, distribute wealth, and maintain fear. Remove the ruler and the structure began to collapse. Attila's greatest legacy, then, was not the territory he conquered. It was the fear he created and the political pressure he placed on an empire already struggling to hold itself together. He demonstrated that Rome could be forced to negotiate from weakness, that enormous sums of imperial gold could become the fuel of an enemy's power, and that a highly mobile army could threaten regions far beyond the traditional frontier. The legend eventually became larger than the man. Medieval writers portrayed Attila as a scourge of God, while later generations remembered him as the embodiment of barbarian destruction. But the historical Attila was more complicated and in many ways more impressive, a ruthless commander, a shrewd negotiator, and the leader of a fragile but extraordinarily powerful coalition. He did not destroy Rome. He did something more subtle. He exposed how vulnerable Rome had already become. And when Attila disappeared from history, the empire he had frightened did not suddenly become safe. The Western Roman Empire continued its long decline until the imperial title in the West finally disappeared in 476. Attila had not been the man who ended Rome. He was the man who showed the world that Rome could bleed.